It's time for the Talent Talk Radio Show, brought to you by People G2, a nationwide leader in background checks and employment screening solutions. People G2 gives their clients access to the best human capital management and due diligence tools available. They are dedicated to helping their clients with all of their people-related decisions. To learn more, go to www.peopleg2.com. Talent Talk centers on the topics of talent recruitment and management, leadership development, company culture, and employee engagement. These are all timely topics for CEOs, entrepreneurs, HR professionals, and business leaders. We hope that as you tune in to listen each week, whether to the live broadcast or to the podcast on iTunes or iHeartRadio, that you hear something you can take away that will help you grow and impact your career in a positive way. And now, here's the host of the Talent Talk Radio Show, the founder and CEO of People G2, Chris Dyer.
Welcome to the Talent Talk Radio Show. It is the afternoon for us here, taping this live, but whenever you happen to be listening or tuning in, welcome to the day, and really appreciate you tuning in and being a part of the Talent Talk audience. This show is really based around my desire to want to talk to very talented and very cool people and pick their brains, find out what they're thinking about, hear about what books they're reading, maybe what journey they took to get to where they are today, and hopefully pick out a few things that we think we can go back and implement in our own lives, implement with our team, maybe share with someone in our company who's struggling, who's at that same point in their journey. And, you know, as we're not at this current moment going to conferences and we're not showing up and having these, you know, kind of little easy to do interactions sometimes to learn something, the show has become that much more important, I think, especially for us to have those conversations and to share that knowledge across whoever wants to listen. So we have people all around the world listening, millions of downloads a year, and I'm just so thankful for the audience being a part of it. We've had wonderful stories come out of our conversations. In fact, a lot of those stories are in my first book, The Power of Company Culture. You can find that wherever you buy your books online, and it has just been translated into Vietnamese as well. So if you need it in that language, it's available. So Talent Talk is live every Tuesday, 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. But most of you sort of get us in the podcast version. You get us after the fact. That's okay. Just make sure you subscribe on iTunes, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Spotify, wherever you find your podcasts. Go there now. You can even go to TalentTalkRadio.com and you can subscribe there. That way you get alerted. Let the computers let you know when a new episode is up and ready to go, and you can listen whenever you have time or on the treadmill or whatever it is you're doing when you're listening to podcasts. So, and finally, before we get to our guest today, do want to make sure you remember we do live tweet all of the best little one-liners, links to the people, our guests on the show, maybe books they've listened to, anything they could have mentioned or anything really smart we maybe stumbled upon. We'll sort of repost that on Twitter. So make sure you're following at PeopleG2 or that hashtag Talent Talk. And if you have replies, you have questions, you have suggestions, that's the place to do it. We are active and monitoring that. All right, my guest today, I'm really excited to have. My first guest will be Karen Weeks. She's the SVP of People of Otter Grove. And then my second guest after the commercial break will be Dr. Ellen Reed, mental toughness expert and co-author of Relentless Solution Focus. But let's go ahead and bring in my first guest, Karen Weeks. Karen, welcome to the Talent Talk Radio Show.
Hi, it's so nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So why don't you give us the quick version, right? What are the cliff notes? The kids say spark notes now, but what are what's the reduced notes on, what is your journey? How did you get where you are? What are you doing now? What does your company do?
Yeah, thanks again. So I actually started in theater. I was going to be a stage manager. I did that for a few years, and I quickly realized that once that was going to be my livelihood, that was not the right career for me. So I made the switch to HR, and I never looked back. I love helping people with their careers. I love helping companies build great experiences for those people while also hitting their business goals. So I've really found my niche in tech startup world. I've been there specifically for about 10 years. And currently with Otter Grove, we are a SaaS platform for retailers and brands to help create recurring revenue. So usually that's subscriptions. If you go to PetSmart.com and want to buy a bag of dog food, we'll ask if you want to sign up for auto ship, and that's Order Groove. So we really partner with retailers to help them with those programs. And I help people with their careers. I actually have a podcast that talks about different career changers. We talk about how to give feedback and build the authentic life and culture, a life for an individual and for a company to make sure you're really being successful and doing what you love.
Well, I love that sort of intro that you started off in theater and theater management, and that pushed you into HR because, and then kind of in thinking about it, that was literally preparing you for HR, right? You're dealing with every different department. You're in the background. You're not necessarily the person standing on front of the stage. You're dealing with prima donnas all day, probably on a shoestring budget. I mean, so there's literally so many parallels to being in HR. So that probably should be like an internship every HR person should have to do before actually going into HR. I love that. That's great.
Well, and especially then I worked for a talent agency for a while. I was trying to figure out exactly what this was all going to be. And literally I'm helping actors get jobs, which is recruiting. So it really did, when I actually thought about it from a corporate lens, I said, oh, I actually think this makes sense. It's not a complete 180 like I think it is.
That's a really cool way to think about. A lot of people right now are thinking, how do I reinvent myself? Maybe if my industry isn't going to make it through COVID, or maybe isn't going to be very strong very soon, I need to go into a new marketplace. And there are so many employers, so much growth happening in our economy right now, but maybe just in a different space, maybe just somewhere, right? So you have to reinvent yourself. And that's a really great example of how you take the talents and the things that you're doing and shift them to something else that works perfectly, but now is in a completely different space. And in fact, you could be in any space, right? Going in HR can work for anybody. You're not restricted to, let's say, theaters, which are currently all shut down right now.
Yeah.
So, right. Which is a bit tough.
Yeah, that's actually what sparked the podcast, was that I was working with clients that were thinking about making career changes, but I don't know anyone who does it. No one really does that. That doesn't happen. I was like, I know so many people. I need to be sharing their story so people don't feel alone and they know that it's possible, whether it's a total 180 or just finding different industries or reevaluating what's important to you. You can do it. And, we have all these stories of people who've done it and they share their advice on what they wish they knew along the way so that others can have successful journeys.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned this idea of giving good feedback in sort of the beginning of your intro there. And let's maybe kind of dive into that a little bit. I mean, this has been a time when people are maybe willing to talk a bit more and get more. I've noticed a lot more vulnerability, a lot more conversations, because we're sort of all into this sort of thing together, right? It's not just, geez, Sally's having a tough time in her life, but I'm fine, and so I can't relate. Like, everyone's on this sort of common denominator. But I guess beyond that, I mean, how do you suggest that we create these spaces, for employees to really talk about things like maybe mental health? Maybe this has been the year of really shining a light on diversity and race relations and things like that, and maybe even just simple things like career goals or how just general uncomfortable topics. So how do you sort of frame that out for people to think about creating that space to have those conversations?
Yeah. And it's actually the same advice, no matter what the conversation has to be, because it's probably a little uncomfortable, especially if you're used to being in an office together and now you're remote and you're doing everything through a webcam. So I think it's really about building trust and the idea of safety, where if I bring something to the conversation, I'm not going to be judged. I'm not going to be reprimanded. It's not going to be held against me. I really can share whatever is going on, whether that is me as the manager and I actually need to have my own vulnerability and share my own struggles, or share some tougher feedback to you and it's coming from a good place, or I'm the employee and I'm struggling and I know I need help and I'm able to share that with my manager without any concern about what that conversation is going to be. But we actually have to train managers to have those conversations. We can say we want to have them as much as possible, but if we don't give managers the tools to create that trust and create that safety and space, it's going to go wrong. And then you totally deplete everything that you've promised your employee.
So, I mean, where do you think that we should start with that? Is this a language thing, a language approach? Is this maybe more of a systematic approach? And what I mean by that, so a language approach would be, in my company, we wouldn't ever say feedback. We would say feed forward, right? We would change it. Instead of saying, well, I don't like what you did yesterday, I'm going to say, hey, the next time this comes up, can you do it this way, right? So forward. And that sort of cuts out a lot of that defensiveness and all that, right? But a systematic approach is like a retrospective in Scrum or Agile, right? To say, okay, this is a designated meeting where we're going to show up and we're going to talk about what worked and we're going to talk about what didn't work, and it's going to be a safe place, and we're going to pick and pick apart what happened, and then we can plan better for the next time, right? It should pick one, or is it a combination, or what do you think?
It's interesting. I actually think it could be both depending on your organization. But before you even get to that point, I actually think leaders and managers need to role model the behavior and build it in more naturally to every conversation. So starting every conversation with, how are you? And not letting I'm fine or I'm hanging in there be the end of the conversation. It's what's changed for you? What were some wins? What were some struggles? Opening up every one-on-one with that kind of language gets you to a place where it becomes just natural to have those kinds of conversations. And then as a manager, I think you need to show your own vulnerability and have the employee ask you that question. Or if they're not going to proactively share it after they talk about their week, you can share something that's going on in your life. And so you're showing that vulnerability, you're role modeling that behavior. So I think maybe that's where the language comes in the sense of you're role modeling it and you're showing that this is how I want you to talk about it because I'm willing to talk about it that way. But it's systematic in the sense of you're doing it every one-on-one. It's a recurring expected thing, so that if it then leads to feedback or then leads to an uncomfortable conversation about my mental health or whatever, that foundation is there. And it doesn't feel like I need to interrupt the agenda of our one-on-one because I need to talk to you about something.
Right. I've been advocating a lot for, especially during this time, and especially while a lot of people are remote and aren't used to being remote, that they should probably knock off as many one-on-ones as they can. And the reason for that is it's super hard to convert everything into a one-on-one. It's overwhelming. It's like, you're in conversations all day and you get no work done. But on the flip side, like, I don't always have a way to be vulnerable in a conversation. I don't always have like something going on in my life that I can share that will like somehow make the other person happy without like totally lying, right? Without right. And so, and I also notice a little bit like if I'm too vulnerable as the boss, then that sort of creates a lot of tension, and people almost want like me to be like, the knight with like a sword, like I'm going to go slay a dragon, and they don't want to see me as being like, weak in any way, right? There's complexity there as well. But we've sort of been talking about our organization, do it in the group, because the group, we bring in 5 people and then we can vent and we can talk about what's dealing with. 2 or 3 people have the same problem, or they can connect in a better way. And the group can generally solve the problem better than I can, right? Because I'm not their therapist. But like in a group therapy session, it's a little bit different. It's a little safer. It's not like, I'm not like you're telling someone. So, I mean, are there other ways you think leaders should think about approaching this or organizing it in a way that can make sense for them if they don't have maybe the tools or that, I don't know, depth? Maybe they have the EQ, right? This is another great thing for anyone who doesn't actually have the EQ to have that conversation, to get the group to help them do it. So what are your thoughts there?
It's interesting. I can see that working in some places. And maybe if you have the kind of culture that really supports that level of transparency and that focus of, we're in this together and we're going to get through it together, and I'm here for you just as much as you're here for me. I think that in some organizations, again, it's all about the foundation that you have. So in some organizations, I don't know if that would work, only because I think some people have a hard enough time being vulnerable with one person, let alone a couple of people. And they don't even know sort of what's going on yet. And they kind of have to work it out until they realize what's actually bothering them. But I do agree 100% that there is also a place of overdoing it, in the sense of if you're having a one-on-one every single day with someone and you're like trying to tap into what vulnerability is going on with them, that may be too much. So usually personally, what I've been doing is checking in with folks on Slack during the day. And then we have our weekly one-on-one, and I just open the one-on-one with, what's a win and what's something you're struggling with. And that sort of leads us down a path of, if there's nothing to talk about, that's totally fine. Let's just jump right into our agenda. But at least it gives the space to have any sort of conversation if there's something top of mind. I think the other place it comes into play is if you're noticing a change in someone. So maybe you don't have to do it every one-on-one. Maybe it's just, once a month or whatever. But if you're noticing a change in behavior, a change in performance, a change in something, that's where you want to make sure that foundation is there, so you can jump in and figure out what is going on and asking a lot of questions. And it doesn't feel weird because it's part of it's part of your relationship.
And this is the difficult part, I think, in HR, anyone in HR or anyone who's sort of dealing with these sort of issues. It's the same sort of, complexity as even lawyers have, right? That it's not one size fits all.
Yes.
It's not like you can ask me this question and I can give you the same answer for every company and every team and every group and every division. You got to get in there and figure it out. You got to get in there and work at it and hopefully, like you said, create enough trust and enough that things can maybe begin to be worked on in a more holistic level, a larger level. But yeah, you get in there and you may show up day one as a leader and realize that like everyone's hiding under their desk figuratively and doesn't want to talk and doesn't want to tell you what's really going on. And how do you get from point A to point Z without losing your mind, right?
Yeah, I'm a big believer of what is right for your organization, whether you call that authenticity, whether you call that your culture, whatever way you want to describe it. But it's like how people used to talk about perks, which is so different these days. But, having a ping pong table was cool for Google. It might not be cool for you. It's the same way with how you have conversations, the way you train your managers, what people should expect of their teammates. It's, of course, there are some fundamentals that everybody should be doing just because it's good best practices, but what that actually looks like for your organization, it's so important to figure that out for what's right for you. Order Group has tried things that I know a lot of other companies do, and it just doesn't fly for us for whatever reason. And that's okay. We should do what's right for us.
Right. Well, I love the ping pong example because it's come up 100 times on the show, I think, before. Yeah. And I can't tell you how many times I've had CEOs call me and say, just isn't something right with my culture. I don't know what's going on. They want me to help them. And I go, cool, tell me about your culture. Well, I have a video game room. We've got ping pong. And, we do beer Fridays sometimes. And I go, yeah, I said to talk about your culture.
Yeah.
And they think that these perks, right? These things that are distractions, that are maybe little pet projects of the CEO. The CEO thinks it's cool to have Pac-Man in the lunchroom and everyone else care less, right? Like, no, that's not culture.
Yeah.
That's not how you get stuff done, your norms. I mean, this is that's culture, right? Or do you give feedback or do you not get feedback? I mean, that kind of stuff.
I was just going to say, it's interesting because I also see it from the candidate perspective. So as I'm doing interviews, it used to be, tell me about your culture. What are your perks? And they knew that it was a question they were supposed to ask, but they didn't really understand why they were asking. Now I have candidates talk about, how did you decide to go home back in March when COVID was starting? How did you address Black Lives Matter? How have you decided if you're going to go back to the office and when you're going to go back? What are you telling your teams? They now have actual tangible things that matter to them. That is a reflection of our culture. And I've really seen that shift amongst candidates as well.
Yeah. And those are some heavy questions to ask, as a candidate. I mean, and I'm sure not all candidates are going to feel comfortable doing that. You better be a top candidate, probably to really swing that baseball bat. But I mean, yeah, that's great. I mean, if someone asked me that, I'd be super impressed, right? If they were really giving me lofty questions that I might stumble with, that I might not have that I'd be like, okay, and I might have somebody. That's a great tip for any candidate. Well, another thing that's kind of come up, and I'm hoping to see what you're sort of thinking about, is around this idea of how do we maybe tinker with performance reviews, or how should that be happening, or what are you guys doing, especially when everybody's remote, right? Do you guys have a difference of what you're doing? Are you tinkering it? Is it just the same thing, but just over a Zoom call? What does that look like?
Yeah, so it's really interesting because our reviews, we call them development feedback. So it's a mix of feedback around what are ways you've made an impact to the business. And so those are sort of your strengths. Areas focus on value. So what's one value you've lived really well and one value that maybe you've struggled with. And then finally, development goals. And so it's all open-ended questions. And it's meant to focus both on what's happening in the here and now, but also future looking as well. And what do you really want to focus on as you think about your next 6 months, for example? And so while obviously ways you've made an impact to the business tend to tie to KPIs or whatever, it doesn't have to. And so one thing that I'm going to be training the team on going into our performance cycle that happens in the February timeframe is think about things outside of maybe the day-to-day job, because those targets may have changed and things outside of their control may have changed. If they had a book of business where they had clients coming and going more so than usual, retention may not be a fair metric to really focus on. Of course, it's important to the business, but it may not be solely within their hands this year. And so focus more on, helping clients through the roller coaster of 2020, or how did you adjust to help your team who is, struggling through this thing. And so really focusing on the broader picture of ways that they made an impact to the business, maybe not just the typical KPIs that they focused on in the past. So that's one thing that I'm going to really coach the managers on this year.
And as we are closing out here, 2020, I like to call it the dumpster fire of a year. I am hosting a webinar tomorrow. And we're going to talk about what are the things that we should keep? What are the good things that have come out of 2020 that we didn't want to have to go through a pandemic to get there, but something good happened. So, are there learnings or the things that you're going to take that Order Grove is going to, keep or implement or try to keep going regardless of what happens with COVID?
Yeah, it's really interesting. We were very much an in-office company, and we had a couple of people that were remote, but they were sales folks or people that it sort of made sense that they weren't in the office. And we have totally shattered that. So we are still remote today for safety reasons, but we're actually going to move to a flexible work from anywhere with an asterisk that has to be within the US. But if you want to go in the office 5 days a week, once we're back, you can. If you want to do it a couple of days, fine. If you never want to go back, that's fine. If you want to move outside of the New York area, that's fine. We just need to set it up, from a business standpoint, but we have no concerns there. We already have 10 people, I think, that have moved outside of New York. We're hiring outside of New York. So the whole idea of we do not have to be in the office together 24/7 has really shifted both how we are working together in a way that we never thought we could, but also the ability to support our team and to live sort of the lives that they want to live. They may not want to live in New York anymore, and that's totally fine. I think flexibility and authenticity have always been things that were really important to us, and we defined it in other ways, but now we're really bringing into the literally, where do you want to be and how do you work? So if, taking an hour off at lunch every day because you need that mental space to refresh, that's fine. If you need to go for walks in the afternoon and do a lot of phone calls versus video calls, that's fine. It's whatever is going to set you up for success and be the best version of you that you can be. And COVID forced that, right? People were homeschooling and living with 5 roommates or living in a studio by themselves. But we really saw people start to own their time and try to figure that out on their own and still be very successful. So we're going to keep pushing that forward and redefining what that looks like.
It's really amazing when you give people autonomy, right? And you say, hey, you can go and do this. All we care about is these metrics, these KPIs, what are these outcomes? We've agreed to that. Go do your thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And for us, that's always worked really well. And of course, you have sometimes some people stumble and you got to go back and you look a little harder at what they're doing or how they're doing it. But man, most of the time they know far better how to manage their time and how to be productive and how to have incredible outcomes than anyone else could ever give them, right?
Yes.
So this is the thing I'm really thankful for that COVID has given people, is this perspective to realize, don't have to micromanage. I don't have to see them in the cubicle farm to know they're working, right?
Yes.
And we can change this. Well, we're almost out of time here. I want to make sure we ask you my 2 final questions, very important. And first is there a book that you're reading right now, or maybe one that you read this year that you think, somebody listening might want to check out?
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually read, Julie Kratz wrote a book, and I hope I get the title exactly right, but it's How to Be an Ally. And it's it's actually a business novel with things written in about how to actually be an ally. But to me, it really spoke to, in those moments of microaggression, or when you see something that doesn't quite make sense, how to speak up and be an ally to someone in the organization. And just when I read it and how she wrote it, just really, really spoke to me. So I've been recommending that one to a lot of folks.
Awesome. And finally, most importantly, how can people find out more about Order Grove? How can they find out more about you or reach out if they're interested in working with you, working for you, and all of that?
Yeah. So, of course, we have a careers page. So it's just ordergroove.com/careers. We are hiring in most of our departments, and we'll open up even more roles in 2021. So check that out. And personally, I'm on LinkedIn. That's probably the fastest way to reach me. But I also have a website, karendweeks.com, where I throw some moments like this so you can see some of the places where I've shared some of my advice, but also worksheets on how to make career changes, some templates that I've used with organizations on how to think about some culture initiatives, and just some other things about me and things that I have found successful in my learning. So hopefully it helps others as well.
And I probably want to spell it because I think I have unintentionally said the company name a few different ways, a few different times, because that's what I do every podcast. I screwed at least one name up somehow. So it's Order, O-R-D-E-R, and then Groove, like, to have a groove, G-R-O-O-V-E. So put that all together. You can find them. They can help you out. Thank you so much, Karen, for being a part of the show today. Hopefully we can have you come back at some point and give us an update on all the cool things that you're doing.
Great. Thank you so much for having me.
All right, we'll be right back after our quick commercial break, and we'll bring in my second guest, Dr. Ellen Reed.
Imagine buying a newspaper and discovering that the news you're reading is 6 months old. There isn't much that stays the